We've got some fancy graphics this week. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Real EFL YouTube show where we look ahead to the weekend's action. We've picked one game from each division to have a chat with you about, and we also look over some of the news from the week. I'm joined by Kyle Keneally. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, thank you. Been a bit of a quieter week with the international break, which is what we'll come on to in just a second about one of the very loose news stories this week.
Yeah, it has been quiet. It's been a bit of a break. But for fantasy EFL fans, there was plenty of action on Tuesday with Accrington and Wimbledon. And it got me ahead of my rival in my own personal fantasy EFL battle. So I was really happy with that. Ali Smith's late goal and Farron Rawson sending off really working in my favour. So there's always something to talk about. And this week, we're going to start with a rather offbeat story that you've spotted on Twitter. That I would expect to read about troublesome teenagers on a local Facebook site. So what have you spotted, Kyle?
I think even that, I probably would expect to see this sort of story about 10, 15 years ago. I didn't really expect that this still happens. But it is former Bristol City, Reading and Middlesbrough forward, Leroy Litter is rumoured to have been knocking on a door in his training gear while playing for Port Vale FC and waking up a cat every morning at 10:15, and he has denied that this has been happening, and is questioned why the person who's put this on has not released the video. But it is a very, very strange rumour to make up if this is false, to be honest. So yeah, you can tell it's international break when we have stories like this coming out.
Leroy Litter doing knock-a-door run before training is one story I didn't expect to be talking about when we started this YouTube channel. Another story I didn't expect to be talking about when we started this YouTube channel is a man who has consistently failed upwards, Frank Lampard. Now, at the time of recording, he hasn't been unveiled as Coventry manager. They've got a press conference scheduled for tomorrow morning. Obviously, they sacked long-serving boss Mark Robins, who took them from League Two to within 90 minutes of the Premier League. Many people inside football or outside football thought it was harsh. There was possibly a split between him and I think it was Adi Vavish, his assistant manager, who was let go. The chairman then came out and more or less said that was why they let Mark Robins go, which was a real surprise. But Frank Lampard, I mean, aside from a Derby team which massively overspent and he still failed to get them out of the Championship, he's not really done anything, has he? Were you surprised with this link?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this last week that I didn't even want to give this rumour sort of the time of day, and now we kind of have to because it looks like that being in advanced talks, he probably is going to become the new Coventry City manager. I feel I was a little harsh. I've proper looked into I knew what his career was like in management. I knew that sort of Derby team, but you do look back on it now with the players and where they are. Your Mason Mount, your Fikayo Tomori, your Harry Wilson. But it was a very strong Championship season that year. If you look at the teams that went up, and even that Aston Villa team that they played in the final, a lot of people argue that sort of the direction that both teams went in, Villa obviously now look at where they are, Champions League football, Derby dropped into League One. But even so, that team was still full of quality, and Derby made the playoffs the season before. I believe they were fifth and then dropped to sixth to actually finish a place lower. At Chelsea, got some Champions League football with the whole transfer ban, etc. But then even at Everton, he's done pretty much what every other manager at Everton has seemed to have done in the last few years and just kept him above water. But even his record towards the end there was very poor. So it is a bit of a surprise, particularly with some of the managers in League One. You're up and coming, and for his name sort of to be linked again with a job, particularly Coventry, because it is a big job to take on and to try and bridge that gap and hopefully take him to the Premier League. So I was surprised to see that he is now the front runner and quite possibly will be manager in the next week or so.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you missed his return to Chelsea, where he took over from Graham Potter, and he helped produce the first bottom half finish in 1996, a record low tally of points and goals scored in the Premier League era. And in terms of winning percentage, he has the worst winning percentage among every Chelsea manager who's led 3 or more matches, with just 9%. He had 1 win in his 11 games in charge. So there are obviously other candidates that were mentioned at the time. There was Matt Bloomfield and Michael Scabala, who meet obviously this weekend in a game in League One. Bloomfield currently seeing really high stock and really impressive looking manager. So I think it feels very, very surprising for me. I wonder if there are parallels here with kind of Wayne Rooney going into Birmingham City. Are they appointing a name rather than a coach, or are we being short-sighted and judging Frank Lampard on some tough managerial jobs? I mean, Derby were expected to be promoted when he was with them last time. Chelsea expect to be top six. Everton expect to be vying for Europe, and all of those teams probably were in worse positions. I mean, perhaps he's just been dealt a bad hand in the past.
Yeah, definitely. As I say, that sort of comparison to your other English managers, you get your Steven Gerrard, your Wayne Rooney. Rooney particularly had that team that he inherited at Derby when they were in real dire straits, but that obviously was off the back of years of overspending trying to get to the Premier League. And like I say, that is what Villa actually went and achieved. They overspent, but it paid off for them, and it is what Championship football is. Plenty of teams do it to try and get to the Premier League, but yeah, it's hard to say. Probably hasn't had enough sort of managerial jobs in the game yet so that you can judge him properly at the moment. But this will be a good indicator at Coventry because they've got a very good side. And yeah, you're hoping that they can challenge for promotion. So we will see.
So two other teams that we're hoping to be challenging for promotion this season are where we start our roundup of one game from each division, and we're going with West Bromwich Albion versus Norwich City. Now, I don't follow the Championship a huge amount, if I'm honest. I do bare research, and to see that Norwich were 14th really surprised me, given that their striker Sands has scored so many goals and he's such a beast in fantasy football. West Brom hovering around the top six. They're desperately trying to get themselves back into the Premier League as well, but both of these teams have got recent history in the Premier League. This was one that we've picked out as a real big clash in the Championship this weekend. It feels like a 6-pointer, even though there are 9 places between the two, because by the time we come to May, you would expect both of these sides to be in or around the top 8 or 9 teams in the division. So what are your initial thoughts on this game, Kyle?
Well, to be honest, I picked this game because I feel like there's just so much to talk about both sides at the moment. You mentioned both sides trying to get to Premier League. Obviously, they were both in the playoffs last season, lost at the same stage. So yeah, these were two sides that you'd expect to be challenging at the top. And towards the start of the season, that was the case. West Brom were top towards the end of September. Norwich similarly were in and around the playoffs, and then both have gone on really interesting runs, but for sort of different reasons. West Brom had 6 draws in a row, 4 of which were goalless prior to winning at Hull just before the international break. And this is where I love how you can use statistics, because they had 2 wins in 10, which on the face of it sounds like an awful record, but then they only had 2 losses in 10 at the same time. So it's that sort of glass half full, glass half empty argument, if you'd like. They've got a very, very good defence. West Brom, joint 3rd best defence. They conceded 9 goals. And on top of that, you look at the 2 teams that are above them, who are, I believe, some of the best the Championship has ever seen, sort of this point into the season. I think it's Burnley and Sheffield United. But they are not great goal scorers. Scored 16 goals, in 15 games. Only 5 teams have scored fewer, which kind of makes the fact that they are back in the playoffs, particularly after drawing so many games, a little bit of a surprise. Both strikers in this game, very crucial. You've got the 2 top goal scorers going head to head. Neither team score particularly great amount of goals. So you have Josh Maja scoring 9, which is 56% of the goals that West Brom has scored this season. Borja Sainz, 11 in 15. He's the Championship top goal scorer, which is just under half of the goals Norwich have scored. So they are heavily reliant, both sides, on these 2 players. Now, Norwich's drop-off is a little bit more. There's a very good reason for it. They've been hit by a mass of injuries. You had the likes of Sargent, who is out until 2025 now, sort of start of next year. You had Kenny McLean, who is serving a 4-match ban after picking up a red card in the in the draw against Middlesbrough. Something they probably didn't want when they had so many injuries building up, because he got another game suspension added to that suspension. For abusive words towards the officials. You had Marcelina Nunes, hamstring injury. Anis Ben Salami. Oh no, Hernandez has just come back. I think he played in an international duty. You had Angus Gunn, who was injured as well. So these injuries were all built up, and that contributed to the run that had been very, very poor. I think they're 6 without a win, lost the last 3 in a row. So they were 7th after 9 games, and as I say, these injuries have really built up. I watched them up at Hillsborough just before the international break, and they looked like a side that was still trying to do the things that they were doing prior, but were just so depleted that they were unable to. As I say, losing a player like Sargent, Signs was nowhere near sort of the goal scorer you were kind of expecting. So I'm expecting a game where we're not expecting goals, to be honest. But I think West Brom are definitely favourites going into this. And Norwich, the international break kind of came at a good point, but they're still sort of without players and need a bit more time to get players back, and hopefully we'll be firing again soon.
Yeah, now West Brom striker Josh Maja, one that I've always liked. I think he was a Sunderland youth. I used to write about him quite a lot when he came up through Sunderland. Now he's been linked with quite a big money move away, £16.7 million. Apparently, the price. Real Sociedad and Celta Vigo to hang on. Given the percentage of goals that he scored for West Brom, they've really got to try and hang on to him, haven't they, in the transfer window?
Yeah, definitely. As I said, then the statistics of both of them scoring almost half of both sides' goals, and that's the same similarly with Borja Signs, because I believe he's been linked with some £20 million Premier League moves. Similarly with a couple of other players for Norwich. So they both are in a situation at the moment that they're hoping to try and put as many points on the board, so that if you get to January and you do lose players, then you've got the points in the bag and you might see a bit of a drop off in the second half of the season. Norwich have got a couple of games that you'd look on paper after this West Brom game that are potentially winnable. I think it's Plymouth and Luton. So they're probably targeting them two and potentially hoping that a couple of the players that have got out injured may be back by that time. As I say, Kenny McLean will definitely be back from suspension. But yeah, as I say, both teams have kind of got to. You've got to bide your time, but then you've also got to hope that when you get to January that you're not going to lose your star players, because that would really derail their season. And if West Brom can't, if they lose Maja and they can't replace his goals, then you'll be seeing potentially 0-0 games pretty much every week with them. Because as I say, they're very good defensively. Alex Palmer in goal. I believe he kept the most clean sheets last season, joining the Championship. Very strong defence. So yeah, we are not expecting. I did not pick this game based on. I think we're going to get a 3-3 thrilling draw. I believe that this will be a very low scoring game, but West Brom at home, I would expect them to nick it.
Yeah, and West Brom's fixtures after this as well don't look particularly friendly. In their next 5 games, they're away at Sunderland, they host Sheffield United, they're away at Watford, all teams in and around them, with Coventry, and who will be having a Frank Lampard manager bounce by then, and Preston, the other two. So it's a game they're certainly going to be targeting. Now, viewers of a certain age, and by a certain age, I mean over 60, if there are any, will remember our next League One game as being one of the biggest games of the 1953 season. Blackpool and Bolton met in the 1953 FA Cup final. I believe it was classed as the Matthews final, which was harsh on Stan Mortensen, who scored a hat-trick in that game. Will there be a hat-trick in the game this weekend? Who knows? Because this is a game between two teams, both in and around the playoffs last season. Blackpool just failing to get in, Bolton losing out in the playoffs. But Bolton currently 11th, Blackpool currently 18th. And you said there's not going to be many goals in West Brom Norwich, Kyle. Blackpool have conceded 28 goals this season and Bolton 24 goals this season. This isn't a matter of who's going to score more, it's who's going to concede less, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Interestingly, I will just pick up on XG at the start, which I know is one of your favourite measurements. I believe Blackpool have the second highest XG per 90 minutes at 1.46. And you look at goals they have scored per game, I believe they're underperforming quite a bit. I think they've got the third highest away from home, which is a similar statistic. Both sides like to have a fair bit of the ball, and I will just start this by talking about Evatt, because there has been a lot of speculation about his job in the last few weeks. He was given a new contract actually after losing the playoff final, which at the time I saw a lot of Bolton fans who were quite surprised by that. This is a manager not like Mark Robins, but has taken a fairly big club from League Two back into League One, and obviously now they're hoping to get back into the Championship. They have had a couple of seasons of sort of last year you would definitely call failure. They looked as one of the best teams in the league. A lot of people said they were better than Derby, but Derby just got the results over the line, and they started pretty poorly. And even they've slightly picked up results in recent weeks, but just before the international break, losing 5-0 against Stockport, really, really damaging for his side. You look at the players in the squad, you've got the likes of Dion Charles, 6 goals this season. Kyle Dempsey hasn't exactly had the greatest amount of minutes, but he's still got 5 goal contributions in little over 500 minutes. And you look at the defence as well, and they've got good players in there, the likes of George Johnston, Josh Sheehan, Owen Toll, but they've conceded, as you say, 24 times. That 5-0 last time, which was you don't know which Stockport team are pretty much going to turn up at the moment because they are very hot and cold. Just looking back before that, losing 5-0 against Wickham and then beating Bolton 5-0. But Ian Evatt has a fair amount of credit in the bank for what he's done, as I say, bringing him up, winning the EFL trophy. He had 5 Manager of the Month awards in his time at Bolton, 2 towards the end of last year. But you are now looking at a manager who's probably, I don't want to say running out of time, but he has got to turn Bolton into a team that are challenging inside the playoffs, sort of by the end of the year, because the fans are turning on him. It's a bit of a toxic environment, and you are looking at Bolton at the moment and thinking they should be much higher up the table than they are. And on the other hand, you've got Blackpool. Steve Bruce have come in, had a very good start, but now they have dropped off as well a bit. They're only 6 points behind Bolton, but they have 4 points above the bottom 4. So they're in a little bit of free fall at the moment. As I said, I referenced them stats of how good their XG looks on paper, but it hasn't really translated, conceding 28 times, most in the division. They seem to be a better team in the Cups. They've won the EFL Trophy group through to the second round of the FA Cup, which are kind of masked over their league performances of late. They've had some poor defeats to teams that you would expect to be challenging sort of top 8, top 10, your Mansfields, your Barnsley. Really damaging defeat to Peterborough, losing 5-1. They are 7 without a win since beating Burton at the end of September, and that's a game at the time Burton hadn't won in the league, so it was kind of a 3 points given at that time. They then drew to Lincoln after that, and as I say, haven't won in the league since. So scoreless in the last couple, goalless against Northampton, damaging defeat to Leyton Orient. So you're looking at 2 teams here, fairly, say local rivals because it isn't a local derby, but 2 sides that are fairly local to each other, and both of them really, really need a result this weekend to kickstart the season. Really.
Yeah, I think there's about an hour, about 38 miles between them, but it is classed, I think, a little bit as a little bit of a rivalry. And obviously, we must say that part of Blackpool's poor form may be Steve Bruce's recent personal tragedy, which has obviously sort of taken him away from the club a little bit, which so often you can see things like that reflected on the pitch. And I think I would just add that having seen Blackpool firsthand this season under Steve Bruce against Lincoln, I thought they were excellent. I thought they were one of the best sides that we played. I thought they were full of attacking verve. So I think these are 2 teams that are both going to be climbing the table in the current weeks. I think in the Opta stats, Bolton are still ranked as likely to finish 3rd in the table in the latest Opta stats. I think it's Birmingham and Wickham to go up, Bolton, Lincoln, Barnsley and Huddersfield to finish in the playoffs, which would be interesting. And I think most of those clubs would take that. Little word on Ian Evatt as well. Passionately dislike the man on a kind of when I say a personal level, I don't know him. He's not done anything wrong to me, but I dislike him because what he does well. And I think Bolton fans ought to just pay attention to the saying, "It's better the devil you know," because he's got them playing half decent football. They're hard to play against as well. They're punching against some big hitters. Let's not forget the Huddersfields and the Birminghams and teams like that. They're big clubs in this division. Bolton won't have it all their own way. They were a League Two side a couple of years ago and they've been through an awful lot. So I think it would pay to have patience with Evatt, because I actually think he's a better manager than he's being given credit for. And putting a team in the playoffs consistently season after season and not getting up, actually, in my opinion, shouldn't be classed as failure, because you aim to get in the playoffs at the beginning of the season. Then it's 2 games or 3 games. Well, anything can happen. But over a 46-game season, he's now twice had them in a position where they're in the top 6. I think that's worth commenting on. 2 teams that would be disappointed with playoff places this season, given how they're doing at the moment, where we now visit our League Two preview. Port Vale versus Crewe. Now, Port Vale versus Crewe is first versus second. We have covered Port Vale already on the show, but this one was just a little bit too good to miss. It's not a local derby as such, but again, it's they're relatively close together in points. They're relatively close together at the top of the table. Geographically, it's not a million miles away. What do we like about this game, Carl?
I mean, you can see why Sky wouldn't have predicted at this point when they did their TV selections that it would be first versus second. But as you say, it's got all the ingredients for a really good game. 13 miles separating the 2 sides, and only 5 points separating them in the table. So Port Vale currently top on 33 points. Crewe are 5 points further back, but have a game in hand. Just 2 very, very good sides. As we say, we spoke about Port Vale last weekend. I actually predicted them to sort of struggle away at Morecambe, with all the fan ownership problems around. I know there was a lot on that during the game. Port Vale fans, I think, came out with a fair bit of credit for how they were in that, but they nicked a goal towards the end, and that is kind of what you look for going away to bottom of the league. You're not always gonna play well, win 4 or 5-0. That's what you need to get promoted at this level. So you've got 2 very, as I say, very good sides. I will mention XG again. Port Vale are actually 12th in the division for XG, incidentally. Very good run for Port Vale in cup competitions. Beats Wrexham on penalties in midweek, which is not many teams can certainly say that at the moment. Beating aside from the division above. They had a very, very good October. I think we touched on this last week. 5 straight wins. They've got Jayden Stockley, who seems to have been around for absolutely ages at this sort of level. He's got 4 goals, 3 assists. Ethan Chislett as well. Very, very impressive. 4 goals and a single assist. And then you've got Crewe, who I believe sort of exceeded expectations last season. Made it to the playoff final. That game against Doncaster in the second leg, when they perhaps weren't favourites at all, but scored 2 early goals to bring it back, and then obviously made it to Wembley on penalties, and we just came up short against Crawley. But you look last season, there were 2 teams there that a lot of people probably hadn't predicted. I know Crawley were by far the biggest overachievement, but Crewe lost a lot of players in the summer and have responded really, really well to that. And they haven't lost since the 28th of September, so they're unbeaten in 7, 3 wins from their last 4. And I want to mention fantasy football as well, because you have Mickey Dimitriou, who is one of the best performing players in fantasy football. If you have not got him, perhaps wouldn't put him this week with the fact they're playing Port Vale, but I believe he's the second highest performer in fantasy football this season. They've got players as well all over the pitch. Ryan Cooney as well, 3 goals, 4 assists. So I'm very much looking forward to this on paper. 2 very, very top sides there.
Now, EFL fantasy players will, of course, know that this is a double game week for the Championship and League One, but in League Two, there are only 2 double games, and therefore picking Mickey Dimitriou would be incredibly risky because he will only play once. Sure, you've picked your team, Kyle. I think you're beating me in our private league. It's not particularly hard, but every single time I pick a player, he gets injured. One player I wanted to pick up on for Crewe. I'm really impressed by Crewe, because at Port Vale, you've got Darren Moore, big name manager. There's been some investment there. They brought relatively big name players in, even last season, to try and stay in League One. So there's some money behind it as well. But Crewe always had this reputation of building from young players coming through the academy. Rio Adebisi being one of the last ones that have moved on. But even going all the way back to the likes of Steve Walters and even the likes of David Platt, way back. King, former England captain, came through Crewe. John Pemberton, players like that. So they've always had that reputation. Now, Lee Bell hasn't got a history of management. It's his first management job after he's come through as a player. I just think they're sneaking up really slowly. I really liked Crewe under David Artell. And it may be a different style of football. It may be completely different, but it feels like Lee Bell is building the same way as David Artell, in that slowly each season, game by game, they're taking really important steps. Now, the player I wanted to highlight, he's one I've championed for a long, long while, who finally appears to have found a home, and that's Shiloh Tracy. Now, I saw him at Cambridge a few times, and he had got all pace to burn. He was full of tricks, but that end product wasn't quite arriving. He's now got 5 league goals in 13 appearances, I believe. Scored a real. He was absolutely excellent, I think. In his last game, I see lots of comments from Crewe supporters about how he was one of their most dangerous players when they beat Notts County. He could be a key man, couldn't he? I mean, we know he's a bag of tricks, former Spurs youth as well, and he feels, and this is going to sound like but he feels really Crewe to me. He's got that kind of, that like Owen Dale. He's got that something that Crewe like to have.
Yeah, I think sort of as a club, they're one of the most underrated in terms of when you look at academies. I remember probably 5, 6, 7 years ago now, but last game of the season, I believe they fielded a full team of players who'd come through the club's academy. When you talk about academies, sort of you go to your Exeters, you start with your Ollie Watkins sort of players. I know Watkins didn't actually come through the academy as such. He was, I believe, actually, I don't know if he'd gone out on loan there. Anyway, Crewe, one of those clubs that never really get the credit, I guess. And as you say, sort of go under the radar a lot. And that goal, by Shiloh Tracy last week, ridiculous goal. His turn of pace, his composure in the finish was something of a player that you wouldn't probably associate with him as such prior to his move to Crewe. But I really do believe he's found a home that he can now thrive under, and as you say, a manager that will get the best out of him. That says a lot about Crewe as a whole. There are a lot of players in there that this might be their time. A lot of people said last year, you look at their team, they were excellent. They were a very, very good side, and when they lost their players, you were like, well, how are they going to respond now? And they've responded really, really well. They might not be second by the time Monday comes calling, but sneaky suspicion that they will get a result on Monday night.
Yeah, and also they're very tight in defence as well, conceding 13. It's the second lowest in the division. Only Gillingham have conceded fewer. Well, thank you very much, Kyle, for your input this week. We won't do the predictions because we never go back over them and have a look anyway. But hopefully we've given the viewers at home a little bit something to discuss. Please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. We're putting some more content on there as well. There are other predictions going on there, which are not mine and Kyle's face, but they are still well worth a watch. But Kyle and I will be back next week, once again, taking you through all of the big games. And hopefully next week we might get through an entire show without mentioning Lincoln. Who knows? We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.